story begins. The metal detector screamed over a patch of dirt that had grown nothing but weeds for 40 years, and the boy holding it had no idea he was about to dig up a man's whole life. His name was Tyler Brandt, 19 years old, home from his first year of community college, with nothing to do, and a borrowed detector strapped to his arm. He'd been sweeping the back acreage of the Halloran farm all morning, because old Walter Halloran had said, with a tired wave of his hand, that the kid could keep whatever junk he pulled out of the ground as long as he filled the holes back in. Tyler had found 3 crushed beer cans, a horseshoe, and a 1968 quarter. Then the detector made a sound it had never made before, not the thin warble of a bottle cap, but a deep, full tone that vibrated up through the shaft and into his teeth. He knelt in the cold April mud and started digging. 18 inches down his trowel struck something that did not give. He cleared the dirt with his fingers and felt the corners of a box. Metal. Heavy. The size of a small toolbox, sealed shut, the seams packed with old tar that had cracked but never failed. He worked it loose and lifted it into the grey morning light, and that was the moment everything quietly began to come apart, though Tyler wouldn't understand that for another 2 hours. He carried it up to the farmhouse with both arms, the way you carry something you suspect is more important than it looks. Walter Halloran was on the porch when the boy came across the yard, and the old man's face did something strange. He was 81 years old, Walter, a wide and gentle man with a white stubble of beard and hands like cracked leather. The whole county knew him. He'd farmed that land for half a century, sold sweet corn off the back of his truck on Route 9, sponsored the Little League team, sat in the third pew of the Lutheran church every Sunday for as long as anyone could remember. He was the kind of old man people described as harmless, the kind who waved at every passing car, whether he knew the driver or not. Children weren't afraid of him. That was the thing people always said. Even the shyest kids weren't afraid of Walter Halloran. So when Tyler set the muddy box on the porch steps and Walter stood up too fast, knocking his coffee mug off the railing, the boy thought maybe the old man's hip had given out. "Where did you find that?" Walter said. It wasn't a question. His voice had gone flat and low, and his eyes, usually so soft and watery, had narrowed into something sharp, something that didn't belong on that gentle face. "Out back, by the old fence line." Tyler hesitated. "You said I could keep what I found." "Not that." Walter came down the steps slowly, but there was no slowness in his attention. He stared at the box like it was a snake. "Not that." And that was the first crack in a man the whole town thought it knew. Tyler watched him crouch, the old knees popping, and run a thumb along the cracked tar seam. Walter's breathing had changed, shallow, controlled, like a man counting the seconds between something. "It's just an old box," Tyler said, though he no longer believed it. Walter didn't answer. He picked up the box, and despite his age and his bad hip, he lifted it cleanly, the way you lift something whose weight you already know. He carried it inside without another word and shut the door, and Tyler stood alone on the porch with the spilled coffee soaking into the wood. Most boys would have gone home. Tyler sat down on the steps instead, because 19-year-olds are made of equal parts boredom and curiosity, and because he had seen something pass over the old man's face that he could not stop thinking about. It had looked, for 1/2 second, like fear, and under the fear, something colder, something trained. Inside the house, Walter Halloran sat at his kitchen table with the box in front of him and did not open it. He knew what was inside. He had buried it himself on a moonless night in 1981, the same week he'd signed the deed to the farm under a name the government had handed him in a manila envelope. He had told himself he would never dig it up. He had told himself a great many things over 4 decades, and most of them had been true enough to live by. But the box was on his table now, and somewhere a clock he could not see had started ticking. He thought about burning it. He thought about driving it to the river. He thought about the boy on his porch who had seen his face change. What Walter did not know, what he could not have known, was that the box was not the only thing that had come loose that morning. 40 miles away, in a windowless office inside a building that did not advertise its purpose, A decades-old file had just been flagged for an entirely separate reason, and two of its threads were about to cross. But that part of the story hadn't arrived yet. Walter finally opened the box at dusk. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff with age, were the things he had spent 40 years pretending did not exist. A set of metal identification tags on a beaded chain, the name on them not Halloran. A leather flight logbook, its pages soft and yellow, filled with his own small handwriting recording hours and dates and coordinates that had never appeared on any map a civilian could buy. A strip of film negatives sealed in a brittle envelope. A single black-and-white photograph of 7 young men standing in front of an aircraft with no markings, somewhere hot, somewhere green, all of them squinting into a sun that had set on most of them long ago. And a folded sheet of paper, typed, stamped in red along the top edge, with a word that even now made his hands go cold. He did not read it. He didn't need to. He had written half of it. Walter Halloran had been once a man named Captain Daniel Reyes. And Captain Daniel Reyes had died, officially on paper, in the records of the United States government, in the crash of an aircraft that, also officially, had never existed. The photograph trembled slightly in his hand. 7 men. He could name all 6 of the others. He had carried their names for 40 years the way you carry stones in your pockets, and he knew exactly which ones were dead and which one had simply vanished, as he had, into a quiet farm and a quiet name and a quiet life. He had thought that was the end of it. He had been wrong, and the wrongness was already driving toward him in a dark sedan. The next morning Tyler came back. He told himself it was to return the detector. He brought it up to the porch where Walter was sitting, and the old man looked at him for a long moment before nodding at the empty chair beside him. They sat. The fields were green, and the air smelled of turned earth, and for a while neither of them said anything at all. "You ever fly?" Tyler finally asked. He didn't know why he asked it. The question came out of nowhere, the way true things sometimes do. Walter's jaw tightened. "Why would you ask me that?" "The box. There was I saw a little picture taped inside the lid before you closed it. An airplane." Tyler shrugged, suddenly embarrassed. "Sorry. None of my business." The old man was quiet for so long that Tyler thought he wasn't going to answer. "I flew," Walter said at last. "A long time ago, before you were born. Before your parents were born." He looked out at the fields. "I flew things I wasn't supposed to fly, to places I wasn't supposed to go, for people who made very sure that if anything went wrong, I had never existed at all." Tyler stared at him. "Like the military?" "No," Walter said. "Not the military. The military keeps records." He almost smiled, and it was the saddest thing the boy had ever seen on a human face. "We were the program with no records." What he said next, Tyler would remember for the rest of his life. "There were 41 of us, pilots mostly, some loadmasters, a few others. We flew supply runs and extraction runs, and a couple of things I still can't say out loud. We were told we were ghosts. We were told the work mattered. And when it was over, they made us ghosts for real. New names, new towns, new lives, they paid for it. They were generous about it, as long as you understood the price." He turned and looked at Tyler directly. "The price was that you stopped being who you were, forever. You buried him." "Sometimes literally." Tyler felt the hair stand up on his arms. "That box," he whispered. "That box," Walter agreed, "is the only proof that the man I used to be ever lived, and you dug him up." Neither of them heard the car turn off the county road. It was a clean, dark sedan, the kind nobody drives out to a farm in spring, and it came up the long gravel drive slow and unhurried, the way cars drive when their occupants are in no doubt at all about where they are going. Tyler saw it first. He stood. Walter put a hand on the boy's arm, not gripping, just resting there, but the boy felt the strength still in those old fingers, and he understood without being told that he should be very still. 2 people got out of the car, a man and a woman, both somewhere in their 40s, both dressed in the kind of plain dark clothes that are a uniform precisely because they're trying not to be one. They moved the way the agents in the old man's stories must have moved, economical, aware, eyes already mapping the porch, the door, the boy, the old man, the distance between all of them. The man carried a slim folder. The woman carried nothing, which was somehow worse. "Walter Halloran?" the woman called from the bottom of the steps. "Depends who's asking," Walter said. The woman reached into her jacket, slowly, deliberately, watching his eyes, and held up a leather wallet with a badge and a card. "Special Agent Diane Okafor. This is Special Agent Lewis Hart. We're with the Bureau." She paused. "Though I think you already know we'd be coming someday." Walter said nothing. The boy looked between them, his heart hammering. 48 hours ago, Agent Okafor went on, a serial number tied to a sealed program got entered into a federal records query. We don't know who entered it or why, but the system flagged it, and the flag landed on my desk. Because I've spent 6 years trying to close out a list of names that were never properly accounted for. She climbed one step. One of those names was a pilot, reported dead in 1979. Except the wreckage never matched, and the dental records were a forgery. And the more I pulled the thread, the more I started to believe that somewhere out there was a man who'd been buried alive on paper and left to rot in a town nobody would look at twice. She stopped. "And then a metal detector goes off on a farm in the middle of nowhere," she said quietly. "And an old box that's been in the ground for 40 years gets dug up, and the same week, the same county, your name crosses 3 of my searches at once." She looked at him with something that was not quite suspicion. "I don't believe in coincidence, Mr. Halloran. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to understand that the answer matters more than you know. Were you ever called Reyes?" The world went very quiet on that porch. Tyler watched the old man's face, and he saw the gentle farmer he'd known his whole life fall away like a coat sliding off a hook, and underneath it was someone else entirely, someone older and harder and unbearably, finally, tired. "Captain Daniel Reyes," Walter said. His voice didn't shake. "Serial number RX-0044-Z. I flew for a program that didn't have a name out of a base that wasn't on any map from 1971 to 1979, and I have spent 46 years waiting to find out whether you people came here to honor me or to finish the job." Agent Hart, who had not yet spoken, made a small sound, not quite a word. He took an involuntary step backward, and his hand rose halfway toward his forehead before he caught it and lowered it again. And Tyler realized with a jolt that the man had almost saluted. "My God," Hart said softly. "Crossfire 4. The unit was Crossfire. You were 4. Walter Halloran, Daniel Reyes, closed his eyes for just a moment. "That was a long time ago," he said. But the air on the porch had changed completely, and there was no going back from it now. Agent Okafor sat down, uninvited, on the top step. She set her hands on her knees and looked out at the fields the way Walter had been looking at them, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its official edge. "I need to tell you what I know," she said, "and then I need you to tell me what I don't. Because there are people who would very much prefer that this conversation never happen, and there are other people, better people I think, who have spent the last few years trying to make sure men like you finally get put back into the record. Both of those groups know your name now, as of this week, and the difference between which one gets to you first might come down to the next few hours." Tyler hadn't moved. He was pressed against the porch rail, invisible, the way the young become invisible when something enormous is happening between adults. "The program was called a lot of things," Okafor said. "On paper, when it appeared on paper at all, it was a logistics designation. In reality, it ran covert aerial resupply and personnel recovery across 3 countries during a war the public was told had certain boundaries it did not actually have. The men who flew it were chosen for 2 things, skill and the fact that they had no one who would ask hard questions if they disappeared." She glanced at him. "That last part was the cruelest piece. They recruited the lonely, the orphans, the ones with no wife yet, no parents left, no one to file a report. I had a sister," Walter said. It was the first thing he'd offered freely, and it landed in the silence like a stone in a well. "They told her I died in a training accident in Arizona," he went on, closed casket, folded flag. She got a pension for 11 months until somebody decided that was a loose thread, and then they told her the pension had been a clerical error and clawed it back. His hands had curled into fists on his knees. She wrote letters, for years, to congressmen, to the Pentagon, to anyone. I know because once, in 1988, against every rule they ever gave me, I drove past her house. I didn't stop. I just drove past. And there was a sign in the yard for a man running for county office, and I recognized the name, and I understood she'd married him and started over, and that the best thing I could ever do for her was to stay dead. He opened his hands slowly. So I stayed dead. For her. It got easier to tell myself it was for her. Tyler felt his eyes sting and didn't understand why. Is she? Okafor started gently. 2 years ago, Walter said. I read it in the paper. I sent flowers under the farm's name. I sat in the back of the church in a hat and left before the end. He shook his head once. 46 years, and the closest I got to my own sister was the back pew of her funeral. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Agent Hart, still standing, cleared his throat. Sir, he said, and the word carried a weight that made Walter look up. I need you to know something. 3 years ago, a review board was quietly convened to address exactly this. Recovered records. Men declared dead who weren't. There's been a process. Slow, buried, fought over by people who'd rather the whole thing stayed gone. But it's real. There are 7 men so far who've been restored, I guess is the word. Names returned. Service recognized. A couple of them got to see it happen before they passed. He swallowed. We thought there were 9 names left unaccounted for. We thought most of them were genuinely dead. He looked at the old man with open emotion now. We didn't think any of Crossfire was still alive. One of us is, Walter said quietly. For now. And then he asked the question that had clearly been sitting in his chest for 46 years. The others, my crew. He picked up the photograph from where it lay on the table beside him. He'd brought it out without anyone noticing, and held it up so the agents could see. 7 young men, an aircraft with no markings, a green and faraway place. Pruitt, Vance, Akana, the Donnelly brothers, Sykes. I know Sykes went down over water in 77. I was on the radio when it happened. But the rest, do you know, after all this time? Do you know what happened to my men? Agent Okafor took the folder from Hart's hands. She opened it slowly. Some of this I can tell you, she said. Some of it I'm not technically allowed to. I'm going to tell you anyway. She laid photographs on the porch boards one by one, like a woman dealing a hand of cards she'd rather not play. Eli Pruitt. He lived. New identity in Oregon. Ran a hardware store. Died in 2003 of a heart attack. Never knew the program had started accounting for itself. We restored his name 18 months ago. There's a marker now, a real one, with his real name on it. She set down the next. Marcus Vance, killed in the line, 1976, and that one was always true. But his designation was scrubbed so completely that his mother went to her grave thinking he'd deserted. We found a cousin. Last year that cousin watched the Navy hand her a flag with Vance's actual record attached. She set down a third. Joseph Akana, Hawaii. Still alive, Mr. Halloran, 83. We reached him 8 months ago. He cried for an hour, and then he laughed for 2. Walter Halloran put his hand over his mouth. Akana's alive, he whispered. He asks about you, Okafor said. All of them who came back, the first thing they asked was about the one still missing. Akana described you, said you flew like the airplane was part of your spine, said you brought a crippled bird in on one engine across 40 miles of dark once, and put it down so soft the wounded man in the back didn't even wake up. She looked at him. He's been saving a chair, Mr. Halloran. That's what he told us. He said, when you find Danny Reyes, you tell him I've been saving him a chair. She wasn't finished. She set down 2 more photographs gently. The Donnelly brothers, she said, Sean and Patrick. They flew together, against every rule about kin on the same crew. Somebody high up made an exception, and I've never been able to find out who or why. Patrick was lost in 74. Sean came home, took a name in Montana, and lived until 2011. He spent the last decade of his life writing a memoir nobody would publish because he kept telling them it was true and they kept telling him it couldn't be. She paused. His grandson kept the manuscript. When the review board reached him, he read parts of it into the record. Half of what I know about the program, I know because a stubborn old man refused to stop telling a story the world wasn't ready for. She looked up at Walter. You're in it. He wrote about you. He called you the quiet one who always came back for us. Walter stared at the two faces of the Donnelly brothers, young and squinting into a sun that had set 40 years ago. They were good boys, he said. They sang. Did you know that? Coming back from a run, exhausted, scared half to death, those two would sing in the cargo bay until the rest of us joined in just to make them stop. A short, broken laugh escaped him. We were terrible. God, we were terrible singers. The old man wept then, silently, the tears running down into the white stubble of his beard, and the boy who had dug up his life looked away to give him what little privacy a porch could offer. But even in that moment, Agent Okafor's face had not fully relaxed, and Walter, even weeping, was still pilot enough to notice. There's a but, he said, wiping his face roughly. You've got a but coming. I can see it on you. Okafor nodded slowly. There is. She closed the folder. The records query that flagged your name this week, she said. The one that started all of this. It wasn't me, and it wasn't the review board. We don't run live queries on sealed names. It trips alarms. It's the whole reason I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the flag. She held his eyes. Somebody else went looking for you, Mr. Halloran. Somebody with access they shouldn't have. Asking questions about a dead pilot in a way that suggests they'd prefer him to stay that way. There are still a few people, very old now, very powerful, who built their careers on the promise that the program would never surface. For them, every man we restore is a brick pulled out of a wall they've spent 50 years building. She stood up. You staying dead protected your sister. It also protected them. And now you're not staying dead anymore. A cold wind moved across the fields. How long do I have? Walter asked. Not afraid. Just a pilot asking for his fuel state. That depends, Okafor said, on how loud we can make this before they can make it quiet. A ghost is easy to erase. A man whose name is on the front page of the record, whose photograph is in a museum, whose story has already been told to 1,000 people. That man is very, very hard to disappear. She extended her hand to him. So I'm not here to take you anywhere, Mr. Halloran. I'm here to ask if you'll let us make you too loud to silence. I'm here to ask if you'll come back to life on purpose, in the open, where they can't reach you. Walter Halloran looked at the photograph in his lap. 7 young men, 1 son, a whole country between then and now. Then he looked at Tyler, at the boy whose careless morning with a borrowed metal detector had reached down into the ground and pulled a buried man up into the light. You found me, the old man said to him. I'm sorry, Tyler said, because he didn't know what else to say. Don't be. Walter's voice was steady now, and something had settled in his face. Not the gentle farmer, not the hard ghost, but a third thing, the thing underneath both. I buried that box because I thought protecting the truth meant hiding it. I had that exactly backwards. The truth doesn't need protecting. He set the photograph down gently on the porch rail, where the light could reach it. It needs witnesses. He took Agent Okafor's hand and let her help him to his feet, though they both knew he didn't need the help, and the giving and taking of it was something else entirely. The next 11 weeks were the strangest and fullest of Walter Halloran's long life. It did not happen the way the movies would have it. There was no dramatic raid, no shootout in the dark. The danger Agent Okafor had described was real, but it was quiet, and the way they fought it was quiet too. They fought it with daylight. Within a week, Reyes's recovered logbook and the photograph and the film negatives from the box were in the hands of the review board, authenticated, entered into a record that could no longer be unwritten. Within 2 weeks, Joseph Akana flew in from Hawaii, 83 years old and walking with a cane, and when the 2 old men saw each other across an airport terminal, neither of them said a word. They just held on to each other and shook, two ghosts proving to each other that they were solid. Akana had, in fact, saved him a chair. The hearing came in the autumn. It was a small room with wood-paneled walls and a long table, and there were cameras along the side, and there were old men in the audience wearing the careful pride of people who had spent decades told to be silent. Tyler was there, in a borrowed suit 2 sizes too big, sitting next to Walter's lawyer because the old man had insisted on it. "You started this," Walter had told him. "You're going to see it finished." They called witnesses. They called Agent Hart, who testified about the review board and the 7 names already restored. They called a forensic archivist, who walked the committee through the forged dental records and the impossible wreckage, and the 11 months of pension paid to a sister and then clawed back. They called Tyler, who stood up shaking and described a metal detector and a muddy box, and an old man whose face had changed on a porch in April, and who finished by saying, in a voice that cracked, "I thought I was digging up junk. I was digging up a hero," and then sat down red-faced and was surprised to find people crying. And then they called Captain Daniel Reyes. He walked to the table slowly, his bad hip and all his 81 years, but he walked it like the airplane was still part of his spine. He told them everything, the base that wasn't on the map, the runs across 3 borders. The night Sykes went down over water with Reyes on the radio, calling his name into a sea that didn't answer. The manila envelope with a new name in it, the farm, the 46 years. He told them about driving past his sister's house in 1988 and not stopping, and about a folded flag handed to a woman over a casket that held sandbags, and about a back pew at a funeral 2 years ago. "I was told my silence was service," he said at the end. "I believed it for a long time, but I want to say this for the record, because the record is the only thing they could never take from me twice." He looked up at the committee, and his voice was clear. "We were not ghosts, we were men. We had sisters, we had names, and we deserved to keep them." He paused. "I'm not here for myself. I'm 81. I don't need much. I'm here for Marcus Vance's mother, who died thinking her son ran away. I'm here for Sean Donnelly, who spent 10 years trying to get someone to believe a true story. I'm here for the ones still in the ground under the wrong names, the ones whose families set a place at the table every holiday for somebody the government swears never existed. I'm here so that the next time a kid with a metal detector digs up an old box, the man inside it doesn't have to be afraid of what comes up the driveway." He stopped. His hands were flat on the table now, steady. "I spent 46 years thinking the bravest thing I ever did was stay dead. I was wrong about that too. The bravest thing I ever did was let a 19-year-old talk me into being alive again." When he finished, the room was silent. Then one of the old men in the audience stood. He was wearing a faded flight jacket, and he raised his hand to his brow in a slow, trembling salute, and held it. Another stood, then another. Within half a minute, every veteran in the room was on his feet with his hand raised, and the committee chair, a woman who had clearly intended to maintain a dignified neutrality, stood as well. And then everyone was standing, and Captain Daniel Reyes sat at the witness table and let them honor the man he had been forced to bury, the man the boy had dug back up. The committee recommended full restoration of record and the awarding of decorations long withheld. The danger Okafor had warned of never materialized into anything more than a few angry, anonymous phone calls, which is exactly what she had predicted. A man loud enough cannot be quietly erased, and Reyes, by then, was very loud indeed. Walter Halloran went home to the farm. He kept the name. After 46 years it was as much his as the other one, and besides, the county knew him by it, and he found he didn't want to give up being the gentle old man who waved at every passing car. But he hung the photograph in the front room, where anyone could see it, 7 young men and an aircraft with no markings, and beside it he framed the citation that finally bore his true name, and beside that a photograph from the hearing of a room full of standing men with their hands raised. Tyler came by most weeks. The old man taught him to fly a little, in a rented Cessna out of the county airstrip, and the boy was bad at it, and they both laughed about it. And once, at altitude, with the green fields spread out below them, Walter took his hands off the controls and said, "You have the airplane." And for a few seconds, a 19-year-old held a small machine in the sky, while an 81-year-old ghost watched the ground he'd been buried in fall away beneath them. Joseph Akana flew back to Hawaii, but they talked on the phone every Sunday, two old men arguing about engines and weather and the names of men who weren't alive to argue back. And the box, the rusted, tar-sealed box that had held a dead man for 40 years. Walter cleaned it up and gave it to Tyler. "What do I do with it?" the boy asked. "Fill it with something true," the old man said, "and don't bury it." Tyler kept it on his desk. Sometimes people asked him what it was, and he would tell them about a spring morning and a borrowed metal detector, and a tone he'd never heard before, deep enough to feel in his teeth. He'd tell them about a man the whole town thought it knew, and the man underneath, and the way the second man had been waiting 46 years in the ground for someone careless and curious enough to dig. He never told it the same way twice, but he always ended it the same way, with the thing the old man had said on the porch the day his life came apart and back together at once. The truth doesn't need protecting, it needs witnesses, and some boxes, once they come out of the ground, must never go back in.